Hello everybody. Today I will talk about the ALS or MND patient. Is the situation really hopeless? During this presentation, I treat the following topics. First, I discuss the diagnosis, the course of the disease and the life expectancy of the ALS patient. Thereafter, I talk over the current ALS research, and finally, I get into the somewhat futuristic muscular performance enhancer and give some conclusions. First, the future ALS patient experiences bearable motor difficulties. A doctor is consulted when they become unpleasant. Because the GP cannot find a solution, the ALS patient is sent to a neurologist, who lets perform a few investigations in order to come to his ALS diagnosis. This happens only fast when there are DNA clues. Most ALS patients, who have no DNA indications, have to wait rather long because other possible diseases have to be excluded. After the diagnosis, the neurologist, who at this moment cannot treat ALS except prescribing Relutech, withdraws and the patient is referred to a neuromuscular center for further monitoring. ALS starts with a few, non-disturbing, paralysis. Those increase progressive. The speed of this differs from person to person, and the ALS patient has to adapt continuously to his new situation. You probably will need a cane for standing and walking before switching over to a rollator and a manual wheelchair. Finally, you will end up in an electrical wheelchair. At the end, all movements like walking, lifting, speaking, breathing, chewing and swallowing are affected. The ALS patient dies when slimes can no longer be coaxed and the diaphragm starts to fail. Although the average lifespan with ALS after diagnosis is 3 years, and most ALS patients die between 2 and 5 years, a substantial 10% lives 10 years or more, and 5% even 20 years and more. There are evidently items we cannot influence anymore, like an unfavorable mutation, a bulbar onset, a diagnosis on an older age, the not making of additional connections in your youth, and an already low FVC at diagnosis, which give you a lower chance of a long life with ALS. But if you want, after your ALS diagnosis, to persist longer, accept your disease, adapt to the ever-changing circumstances, look after a daily occupation, do not become depressive, let you surround well, live healthy, do not pursue your physical limits and avoid fatigue. Note that the vast majority of the ALS patients will, despite all these initiatives, still die quickly. Also, some cannot live with this desperate situation or are afraid for the future and choose understandably for euthanasia. Find the cause of ALS and eliminate it with a suitable treatment to get rid of ALS. It's the strategy to develop medication. However, this obvious reasoning is unfortunately not valid when fighting ALS. Not only are there many causes leading to ALS, such means are also, according my opinion, coming too late to help the ALS patient. ALS is probably a disease in 2 steps. First, motor neurons are attacked. This can have multiple causes, and there are most likely differences between familial and sporadic ALS. Moreover, we deal here with ALS persons with no illness indications. Secondly, a disturbed communication between motor neurons and supporting cells results in faster dying of motor neurons. Motor neurons and supporting cells communicate with each other and they influence each other gene expression. When too much motor neurons disappear, their communication gets disturbed. The expression of some genes of motor neurons stops while others are activated. Motor neurons do no longer operate properly in the microglia. The immune system of the nervous system no longer recognize them and destroy them. The attack on motor neurons still continues, but its effect is now negligible compared to the destructive activity of the disturbed communication. It is, although the comparison is somewhat simple, like with GPS coordinates which need at least 4 satellites in sight, less available satellites led to nonsense. In short, too few remaining motor neurons are harmful. Don't get me wrong, One can easily search for causes, but if you want to improve the life of ALS patients, you will have to deal with it differently. In fact, the control for a suitable medicine is simple. First, test the cure on already sick ALS animal models. Only if this led to good results, one may initiate a clinical trial with ALS patients. Otherwise, don't even bother to start with this. Still, although not always realized, there already happens research in order to deal with the problems of the ALS patient, and there are yet 2 medicines available. ALS patients receive often a prescription for Alutec. This medicine fights against too much stimulation of nerves, also called excitotoxicity by science, in the hope that more motor neurons will survive. Although clinical studies show longer survival and an improved functioning of the muscles, and a lot of recently diagnosed ALS patients start with it, most of them drop out because of its side effects and the thought that it doesn't help anyway. Probably, it works during the transition from step 1 to 2, where the body tries to compensate for the wasting away of motor neurons with augmented nerve activity. Most likely, it does no longer happen in step 2 and the medicine has no effect anymore. Also, ALS is also characterized by an increased destructive activity of more microglia, nerve supporting cells that are part of the immune system. Cannabis oil could potentially inhibit them, but I would rather see its effect on an ALS patient by a clinical trial. However, I fear that this treatment, like possible other means that can be used against the many things that can go wrong with ALS, among which are shortage or excess of neurotrophic factors, a derailment of the immune system and inflammation, abnormalities on the cytoskeleton and intracellular transportation, disturbances of the protein metabolism, the various dysfunctions of organelles and supporting cells, the destruction of the neuromuscular junction, or simply cell death of motor neurons, will be too late for the ALS patient who has lost most of his motor nerve cells. In addition, the function of the remaining motor neurons is not repaired and the reasons for the aggression of the microglia are not removed with them. There is for these still for a long time no medication, but it is probably a useful research area which currently somewhat ending in the background caused by the trendy quest for mutations in genes. Mind however that you still have to do it with the remaining motor neurons. Better results may be expected when motor neurons can be inserted, and especially, new useful connections can be made with them. And no, they don't have to be the same as in the past, they only have to work. However, we are still far away from this and we don't have to count on it for now. It is perhaps advisable to find out how this works in young sportsmen and musicians. It seems on an older age more difficult or even impossible to improve motorically. Artificial control of the own muscles with the brain, which I call the neuromuscular performance enhancer, is perhaps futuristic but surely faster reachable than the method discussed before. ALS patients cannot be cured with this, but a performing neuromuscular performance enhancer can improve their independence and quality of life considerably. We do not have to obtain perfection. Each improvement compared to the current condition is a bonus. And on a brain-computer interface-based system that drives muscles with the brain should have 3 cooperating parts. At first, the driving signals of the brain should be read and understood. Further, muscles should be operatable by a comprehensible set of commands. Finally, the driving signals of the brain should be sent to the muscles where they will be translated into the correct commands to control the devices and muscles. Neurosurgeons are probably needed to fix implants in the body. There are also some practical requirements for such a system. First, it cannot need too much room and should stay operational during transport. There should be safety measures against a system failure and it may not damage the human body. Although one has to install what is needed at a given time, new necessary modules can be easily integrated. Due to individual differences and a deteriorating physical condition, it should be easy to fine-tune the system in function of the needs. One has to take into account that controlling the system is a learning process for the ALS patient. And finally, it should be affordable for both the ALS patient and the insurance. Persons with multiple sclerosis are also confronted with paralysis, A neuromuscular performance enhancer device should therefore also be useful for these patients and all people that have some kind of paralysis. Therefore, I am pleased to see private initiatives like PersonTechnology.com and the Johns Hopkins University with its Corticom system, although the artificial steering of muscles should also be tested. For some large-scale movements like coming straight, standing and walking, there exists already a solution with exoskeletons. They have to be used at least 3 times in a week, and preferably daily, in order to produce noticeable effects on permanent paralyzed people like ALS patients. But they are today far too expensive to be applied regularly in this without far transport. A couple of €1,000 is okay for some paralyzed patients or the local physiotherapist, but everything that costs more than €10,000 is too much. Controlling these exoskeletons with the brain would be nice, but simply switching on and off these devices already suffices to counteract the many discomforts of a sedentary life. Although there currently already are tools for speaking and breathing, they all work on their own eventually after some input of the patient or his assistant. It is probably a lot more difficult but recommendable to let them control by brain signals. However, steering the involved muscles with the brain would be ideal. For other movements, chewing, swallowing and fine motor skills, it remains waiting for the muscular performance enhancer. Hopefully, the involved muscles can be steered directly with electrical instead of chemical signals. This is already suggested by the release of positively charged calcium ions during the contraction of muscular motor units. I would start with movements that may cause little or no harm, like grabbing or turning a key, to learn controlling everything before dealing with more dangerous movements, among which speaking, breathing, chewing and swallowing. For now, the ALS patient, if she or he belongs to the happy few, has to pose with the advices that I have summed up in this presentation. However, with a lot of hard work by various people, the development of new medication and tools is on the rise. Hopefully, you can still use them.